Funding for this program has been provided by this station and other public television stations.
And there's so many myths about relationships. You know, the minute I talk about loving relationships, everybody immediately flashes on man-woman marriage. And we forget that that's only one relationship in our life. Think of the myriad of others.
From Sacramento, KVIE presents Leo Buscaglia in Loving Relationships.
Thank you. My goodness, things are really looking up. You know, I realized that 6 years ago tonight, this very night, I did my first lecture for public television right here in Sacramento in a university auditorium with no special lights, a couple of old battered cameras, the podium that would fall over anytime I spoke, microphones that I could knock off the top here, and look at this. But the topper of them all is, you know, that Buscaglia can't speak with a coat on. And generally, I have to take it off, and there's nothing here. I have to drop it on the floor. For the first time anywhere. Watch what happens tonight. I've arrived. There's no place to go but up. I'm going to begin by telling you a story. But here it is, and I think you're going to love it. It's a once upon a time story, and we never become too old for once upon a time stories. If you are, I feel sorry for you. But once upon a time, there was a little girl, and she was walking through a beautiful meadow. And she saw a butterfly impaled upon a thorn. And very carefully she reached over and she plucked it off and she released it. And the butterfly flittered off. And then it returned. And it became a beautiful fairy godmother. And the fairy godmother said, "For your kindness in saving my life, I want to give you a gift. You can have any wish you desire." And the little girl thought for a long time, and then she said, "I just want to be happy all of my life." And the fairy godmother smiled, and she leaned over, and she whispered something in the little girl's ear. And then she became a butterfly and flew off. And as the girl grew, no one in the land was happier than she. She smiled all day long, she sang, everyone cared about her. And everybody wondered about her secret of happiness. And when they asked her about it, she'd only smile and say, "I listened to a fairy godmother." And then as the years went on and she became elderly, she was finally lying in bed and she was dying, still with a smile on her face. And all the friends came around her and they said, "Please tell us. We're afraid that you're going to die without divulging this wondrous secret. What was the secret of your happiness?" And now this wonderful, smiling little old lady said simply, "The fairy godmother told me that no matter how secure everyone seems, they'll always need you." We need each other. And one of the great tragedies is that there are so many people behaving as if they are the Great Wall of China. You know, try to get over me. And what a shame, because the only thing that's happening is that you're sitting there on that side wondering why people aren't coming. It's hard to get over that wall. Break it down. Open your arms. We all need someone. I'm constantly reminding people that if you have at least one person in this world, no matter where they are, who they are, to whom you can always go, and they always hand you open arms and take you close. You'll never need a psychiatrist. You'll never be alone. But we have to remember that we can only do it together in loving relationships, because without relationships there is no joy, there is no laughter, there is no magic, there is no wonder, there is no rapture. And some of you have been hurt, and but everyone in this audience has been at one time or another hurt or disappointed in a relationship. You're saying, poking your neighbor, and you're saying, yeah, but there is no tear, and there is no parting, and there is no suffering, and there is no disappointment. And I say, you're right. If you don't partake of relationships, you're not going to be disappointed. How can you be? But also, you're not going to be alive. Because all of those things I've mentioned, the pain, the despair, the tears, and the joy, and the rapture, and the ecstasy, are all a part of life. And I'm suggesting we dive right in the middle of it, because in actuality, our only alternative is loneliness. I would just as soon be scarred. But we need each other for growth. Everybody here tonight brought with them a history that's uniquely theirs. One of my great dreams would be to be able to sit down with every single one of you. Those of you all the way up there, I'd like to sit down with you, and I'd like to have you tell me your history. When I was teaching love class, I used to ask my students, tell me about your mama's and your papa's history. Where did they come from? What did they dream about? What was their greatest pain and their greatest ecstasy? These kids didn't know. Part of the fault lies with Mama and Papa for not grabbing them and sitting them down and saying, now shut up, I'm going to tell you my history. I don't want to know your history, never mind. They'd say, what do you mean my mama's history? I said, did you ever ask her about what was her greatest disappointment, her greatest pain, her greatest joy, her greatest moment of ecstasy? Ecstasy? My mother didn't have any ecstasy. Well, who do you think you are, the fruit of the Immaculate Conception? But how are we going to grow without each other? That's the way it happens. And then you are my mirror. You reflect who I am. I wonder how many in this audience have experienced walking into a room and have everybody light up and say, oh, look, she's here, as opposed to walking into a room and having people say, oh, my God, look who's coming. If we watch, we'll see the reflection of our image in people's responses to us. Is it a celebration because you are, or a bummer? And then, you are teaching me every day because you are a model. And the more models I can have, the more alternatives I have. And the more alternatives I have, the more creative I can become. But I can't do any of those things alone. I need every one of you. And I guess my greatest frustration in life is the fact that I know that I can never really get into everybody. And so even when I have casual relationships, I jump into them so deeply, I frighten people. I say, tell me about yourself. And people are always saying, who, me? What's there to tell? What's there to tell? There's nothing wrong with you if you want to have people in your life, if you want to walk around with your arms open, if you want to say to people, I'm ready for you, come on, whatever you bring, I'm ready to take. But the amazing thing is that we study everything in the world, but very few of us study relationships. We think relationships are made by God, and maybe they are, but they have to be practiced in reality on earth. And that's where it happens. How sad that we enter a relationship so naive that we don't imagine that they require work. We would never think of making a souffle without learning about the ingredients and how you whip it up and what you do and how you celebrate it, because it's certain to fall flat. But we enter into relationships without learning anything about how do we keep relationships growing and loving and blooming and exciting and growing. We just go from relationship to relationship to relationship, and we often emerge with tears and with bitterness and with pain and with disappointment and with fear, and we say, never again, only to know that in a few years, you'll do it again. There's no choice, so why not do it right? Once and for all. You know, I got a wonderful letter I want to share with you, with permission. This woman wrote, I know that you're always stressing that we need other people for life and for growth. Well, that may be so, but I've had it. There you go, Leo. I've learned that people really don't give a damn about anything except themselves, that they can't be trusted, and that they're not much good. I'm not a fool. Why should I put myself in the hands of such people and get hurt again? And then later on in this letter, she actually answers her own question, and she says this, my life doesn't seem to have any meaning anymore. There's no one left that I can talk to who really cares about what I say. I don't have any more incentive. I don't even want to leave my house anymore. I feel afraid and alone and empty. Dr. B, what can I do? Well, you know, I can console her by saying maybe it's better to have loved and lost than have to do 40 pounds of laundry every week. But I don't believe it. And maybe I can say, continue to isolate yourself until the man you're looking for falls through the ceiling on your lap. But I don't believe that. And maybe I have to tell her that to face the fact that she can't relate with her head alone, that relationships never offer a guarantee, and they always require work. And therefore, they don't work for people who aren't willing to work. And they don't work for people who aren't willing to work without guarantee. We're always waiting for the right person to come along. And we say that when they come along, we will live happily ever after. Doesn't that make you want to puke? I mean, how old do we have to be before we realize that that's the most destructive myth? There's no such thing as happily ever after anything. It doesn't happen. And you're waiting for the right person. I guarantee you'll wait forever. Where's this right person? You know, there is no right person. We become the right person. That's the thing. You know, I remember Mom and Papa always told us their stories, all the time. Wonderful stories. And they also told their story about their courtship. And we couldn't believe it. You know, here they were in this tiny little village in Piemonte. My dad lived in a village about 2 miles from my mother. And he used to have, in fact, when I went to visit them, I used to walk the path. It's still there, this old dirt path that used to go from his village to my mother's village, where he was a director in a factory. My mother was a seamstress. And when he saw her, he knew she was right. And she saw him, and she didn't dare think he was right. And the courtship was amazing because at that time, there was none of this romantic stuff. He saw her, he was interested, he went home and talked to Papa. You know, Papa talked to her Papa. They said, well, you have a cow, we have a pig. It sounds okay, you know. And then Papa was allowed to come to Mama's house every Sunday for polenta, you know. And Mama was there stirring and working and so on. Papa was sitting there with all the men enjoying. You know, Mama served and then sat back in the kitchen and everyone giggled and laughed. But this was what was done. And then he married her. And, you know, she used to always say she never really got a good look at him until about 2 weeks after they were married. And how come they lived together for more than 50 years of magic? How come? You know, it was a constant discovery. It was a wonderful thing to watch. Even after 50 years, I used to love to watch the interaction. You know, Mama would say something. Papa would look up. Mama would look at him. Silence. You know, you got the message across. Basta. You know, enough. But it was an amazing guy. And I remember in love class, I used to say, my parents were married more than 50 years. And the kids would say, 50 years? What did they have to say to each other after 50 years? You'd be surprised if you keep discovering and you keep growing how much there is to share. It's never boring. But anyway, there will never be the right person because our expectations are incredible about this right person. What do we expect? We expect from a right person. The person has to be our friend, our lover, our confidant, our cook, our bottle washer, our budget expert, our lover, our greatest joy, our amusement, our joy, our ecstasy, our sex, our accepting, our forgiving, our understanding, our loyal and our loving one. Well, where the hell are you going to find such a person? You know, maybe they exist in heaven. They certainly exist in romantic fiction, if you believe it, and in fantasy. But in reality, they're not there. You marry the best thing you can find. And then you hope and pray. That's what it's all about. And you work, and you work, and you work. And you'll be surprised at how much you can discover. And there's so many myths about relationships. You know, the minute I talk about loving relationships, everybody immediately flashes on man-woman marriage. And we forget that that's only one relationship in our life. Think of the myriad of others. Think of mamas, of papas, of sisters, of brothers, of neighbors, of friends, of in-laws, of co-workers, and we can go on and on and on. And life is a celebration of all those relationships, not just the limitation of a man and a woman in a marriage. If that's all you do, you're going to be lost. You've got to go out and bring in these others because they feed you, they nourish you, they make you healthy. And we have to understand also that we're capable of loving many people with great intensity. I like to think that in a marriage you say, of all the people I'm capable of loving, I select you to live my life with. And that is indeed the greatest compliment, but that doesn't mean I'm going to exclude everybody else. Our marriage will die, our relationship will die if I don't include everybody else. And we are capable of loving everyone else. And the reason we think, many of us think we aren't, is because we see a limitation to love. And there is no limitation to love any more than there is a limitation to you. And a concept like loving all of person kind seems bizarre to people. They say, that's insane. And when I say that, they say, God, you're naive. Well, you know, my question is, whom am I going to exclude and for what reason? The minute I exclude someone, I realize what a mistake I've made. They had something to give me, and I let them go. I sent out 1,000 questionnaires at random across the United States to people who had had relationships that had been successful and long-lasting. And I asked them, which qualities do you think are the most essential for a loving, lasting, growing relationship? And you know what I really enjoyed? I got 600 responses out of 1,000. Statistically, that's outrageous. And people wrote little notes on the margin. We had so much fun doing this. A few of them said, we almost came to blows. You almost caused a divorce. But nevertheless, I got them talking. I asked them to identify their primary relationships. And primary relationships, almost straight along the line, were in a marriage, husband and wife. But then I asked them to define their most important secondary relationships, and that varied from a girlfriend that they've had for years to a boyfriend that they've known ever since high school, to neighbors, to co-workers. Some people said their greatest relationship was with God. How lucky. You know, but here's what they said. In primary relationships, the top one was the ability to communicate to each other. The ability to talk to each other. Isn't that amazing? Now that seems like the simplest thing in the world, but it really is a tremendously difficult thing because it has two facets, not only talking, and we're great at that, but also listening. But let me read the list to you. Communication was number one. Affection was number two. Touch me. Reach over and hug me. Is it too much to ask that occasionally you give me a little cuddle? Forgiveness, number three. Honesty, number four. Vulnerability, number five. Dependability, number six. A sense of humor, for goodness sakes, number seven. And listen to this, with all the books that are written out, all the sex manuals, you know, the G spots and the W spots and the P spots and all this baloney you're supposed to know, number 8 on the list was romance and sex. You know, if you looked at the literature, you'd think it was number 1. Without that, there was nothing. Number 8. And then patience. Oh, yes. And freedom. Isn't that nice? And then, isn't it interesting? I asked the same question about secondary relationships. You want to hear the same list in a slightly different order? Communication is still number 1. Honesty, acceptance, forgiveness, concern, vulnerability, understanding, affection, respect, sharing, and a sense of humor. What does that tell you? Relationships are relationships with whomever. And the same qualities that make one relationship grow make another relationship grow. And so developing all of these qualities keeps all of your relationships exciting and alive. But let's look at vulnerability. You know how I like to talk about vulnerability? As the art of letting it happen. But that isn't the way it's defined. If you looked it up in a dictionary, you'd find it this way. And you'd never want to be vulnerable. You think you have to be crazy to be vulnerable. Vulnerability is defined as being open to hurt and to pain. But you know, who's so crazy? And here's Buscaglia standing up saying that vulnerability is one of the most essential things for loving and for relationships. In the same definition, there is a definition for contract bridge. And vulnerability is defined in contract bridge much better and happier for me. Listen to this. Vulnerability in contract bridge means allowing yourself to be liable to increased penalties, but entitled to increased bonuses if you win. And that's where it's at. Sure, you may lose and you may cry, but you may win too. And if you win, look what you've got. But you know, to be lovable, we've got to be open and vulnerable. But we fear our softness, especially the men in our society. Thank goodness that the women are teaching us that it's all right for us to be soft. And you're not weak by being soft. Probably the most beautiful thing in the world is a gentle, soft man. Everybody wants him. But we see it as a weakness. And we see it as being mature when you can stand alone. You know, I need no one. I have made it. You know, who needs you? Hell, I need everybody. It's so wonderful to walk down the street and let everybody know I need them. And it's amazing because there's a fallacy that goes along with that when people see that you're vulnerable, they take advantage of you. It's not true. You know, very few of us take advantage of a little dog wagging its tail or a pussycat that comes to us. We don't do that. And kids, isn't it amazing? The abuse the children get, and they still come back and sit in your lap. You take the cat and you fling him out the window, and he comes in through the other window and sits on your lap. Boy, that's what it means. But we've got to be willing to reveal ourselves and to be able to say, what a wonderful moment that would be. Honey, I need you. I need you. Not, you know, I need you. That scares the hell out of the strongest of us. But I need you. I'm really glad you're here. I'm not perfect, And therefore, I need you to help me to grow, to help me to do all kinds of things. I'm willing to adjust to meet your needs and to realize, of course, that the world isn't only meant for you. There are really people moving around here that really believe that the world was meant for them. I've got news for you. It's also mine. But you know, being exposed like this and letting people know that you aren't the Rock of Gibraltar isn't easy. But those are the things that we love about you, those soft, vulnerable spots. And then affection. Isn't it funny how something as beautiful as affection should frighten people to death? And we are a culture that is indeed afraid of sharing our affection. I remember I grew up in a home where everybody kissed everybody, everybody hugged everybody. In fact, it was a mortal sin that had to be confessed in church if you left without kissing mama. But that's how we learned what affection meant. Because, you know, affection is learned. The society that you live in teaches you how to manifest it in action. And if it says it's not good and it doesn't reinforce it, then where are you going to get it? And you know, we've stopped showing outward affection, and we're going to have to relearn it or die of loneliness. And it isn't available when people haven't been taught by their culture to be affectionate. Where do you go to learn it? How do you break down the guards that you have? You know, there's a wonderful story of a young man who decided to change his ways. And he went to a bookstore to find a book about hugging. And indeed, he found one there, and he was so delighted. It was called How to Hug. And he went home and found out that he had bought the 9th volume of the encyclopedia. There it is. Very few people are comfortable showing affection. I had the most interesting experience. The month before last, my book, Living, Loving, and Learning, was published in London, in England. And I was asked to go over there on a promotional tour. And here is Buscaglia with his arms open, this passionate Italian, going into studios and hugging people and having them go, ah! You know, we don't do this in England. And they said they didn't. It was a very weird sensation for me to see that they were really afraid of me. And because they had read the advance notice that Buscaglia hugs, you know, they would stand across the room and say, "How do you do?" And on talk shows and television, they would say, "You're not really advocating that we Britishers run around hugging each other." I said, "Yes. Yes, I do." And they said it would never happen. Well, you know, one of the newspapers in London decided that because it got so much publicity, not that I was advocating loving each other and caring about each other and all the other things, but that this wild man from the United States was going to Britain saying, hug each other. That was the big thing, headlines in papers. You know, and so one newspaper sent out huggers over London. This is the truth. I can show you the newspaper. It was the whole front page. And they were instructed and paid for, like you hire them at parties, to run around and hug people. And then they were interviewing these people and saying, "How did you like it?" And amazingly enough, even though there was all this resistance, the Londoners, like everybody else, said it was nice. We should do that more often. And you know, in a culture where it frightens you to have someone reach out to you in love, we have something to worry about, as far as I'm concerned. When people bump into me, the first thing they say is, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And I say, "I'm not. It was nice." Of course, they leave horrified. But you know, we are hug-starved. Sometimes when and maybe this is why it's so nice to stay here, even if it means staying till 1 o'clock, and showing you that it's nice. Hugging and hugging. And so often you get, especially among the aging, people that will whisper in your ear that, you know, you're the first man that has hugged me in 17 years since my husband died. You know, what the hell kind of a culture are we living in when a beautiful woman like this, who's lived her life sharing and giving and loving, should be love-starved? I have a woman friend who is constantly in a turmoil because she says she wants so much to reach out to others, but it's always misinterpreted. And it is for some reason. We always attach a sexual connotation to affection. If a husband and a wife are affectionate, then we call them exhibitionists. You know, look at those two. What are they trying to prove? They're trying to prove they like each other. So shut up. If parents are loving with their children, beware of incest. And if we touch friends of the opposite sex, we're engaging in promiscuous acts. And heaven forbid, if people of the same sex touch, especially men, certainly they're homosexuals. Some of you saw the Donahue show I was on the last time, and we were talking about hugging. And at the end of it, this man stood up and he said, Dr. Buscaglia, are you suggesting that men hug? And I said, yes. And he said, boy, if they do, you're going to turn this country into one big San Francisco. You know, I think we laugh at that to keep from crying. But really, sexuality has ceased to be equated with warmth and tenderness. It's become a thing that has to be done. We have sex. You have sex. We describe loving with 4-letter words. Think about it. And we're so concerned about techniques. My goodness, all you have to do is go to a library and there's a shelf. It's behind glass. But there's a shelf about how to. Flipping the book. How about 42 tonight? But you always remember that you do not have to say yes to 42. You're always in control. You can always say, okay, Columbus, you've discovered enough for one night, ship off. You know, it was wonderful that Lerner and Lowe in My Fair Lady had Liza say to this man who was all words, don't talk of love, show me. We need to reach out. We need to risk. We need to touch again in tenderness, in warmth, in affection, in bringing us together. You know, lab experiments have shown that lack of demonstrated affection can lead to loss of appetite, can lead to slowed growth, can lead to decline in intelligence and emotional problems. Even rats, for goodness sakes, who are fondled and loved in experiments, run mazes faster. Affection also, we found, can eliminate cholesterol. You know, don't put him on a diet, cuddle him. Don't worry about him all the time, love him. And see what happens. You know, they fed in an experiment high-fat diets to rabbits, and then half the rabbits were loved by the experimenters, and half were just left to eat. Well, you know, when they finally tested the cholesterol level, they found out that there was far less fat content built up in the blood vessels of those rabbits that had been loved. Isn't that nice? You know, just reach over to her and go, nice old thing. You know, Helen Colton describes a study that was observed in Europe about touching behavior. And they compared touching behavior of Parisians with touching behaviors of people in the United States. And it was an amazing finding, because they found that the average Parisian in a normal conversation at a sidewalk cafe will make human contact with the person they're talking to at least 100 times an hour. And in America, 4. You know, Helen didn't go into Italy. Her numbers would have gone berserk. Goodness, every time I go there, I'm felt and kissed and loved. I find parts of me I never knew existed. And then forgiveness. Forgiveness. You know, there's a wonderful ring to the word forgiveness. It's an action word, and it suggests a letting go, a soothing, a healing quality, a reunited, a bringing together again, an acceptance of the humanity in you as in myself. Children, and you were all children once, and you still are, if you get in touch with it, are natural forgivers. It's the parents that won't forgive. You know, the children fight. 2 minutes later, they're together again having a good time. Parents interfere, and they're never speaking to each other again. That happens all the time. And most of us are still bearing grudges against our parents. For goodness sakes, let it go. They may not have been perfect. They tried to do the best they can. Why are you still bearing grudges against ex-husbands and wives, you know? Boy, I hope his new wife kills him. Between lovers, you know, I'm convinced that if you've ever loved someone, you will always love them. And that if you can turn around and say, I hate someone that you love, you never really love them. You wish them well, even if it means they're going without you, because you love them. Grudges against society, grudges against our children. I know people who even bear grudges against God. I'll never forgive God for what he did to me. What an ego. And we even bear grudges against ourselves. We talk about what we should have done, and we spend our life talking about what we should have done. You know, what the hell can you do about what you should have done? Forgive yourself. I was a jerk then. Now I'm so smart. Some of us maintain these grudges for a lifetime. I'll never forgive him. They say, drooling. Yeah, I'll forgive him when I get even. You know, to be wronged is nothing unless you continue to remember it. Why not relax and leave vengeance to heaven? Bearing grudges only hurts you. Forgiveness forgives you, releases you. Gerald Jamplowski says, hate, bitterness, vindictiveness are overwhelming, overpowering, self-defeating, and intellectually as well as emotionally depleting. You know, life is just as simply a group of lessons. We learn and we learn and we learn and we learn. Learn, but don't vindicate. It only punishes you. And forgiveness is a choice. You know, you can choose to forgive, or you can choose forever to avoid the person, to attack the person, to abuse the person, to hate the person. We're so quick to condemn. Isn't it amazing how many relationships have broken up simply because of a word that was or was not spoken, a thoughtless action? a mistaken judgment, an unfeeling criticism. It's enough to devalue years of relationship, of sharing, of warmth, of togetherness. And what have you accomplished? And we engage in scenarios of blame and of hurt. Forgiveness begins with honesty and with empathy. We have to have what I call sympathetic identification, remembering that nothing that you have ever done, I have not done too. And we'll always make mistakes. But how wonderful to be able to live being forgiven and to forgive. Gandhi, the wonderful man, said, "Go ahead, hate the sin, but love the sinner." Therein lies the challenge. That doesn't mean that you don't have a right to scream and to yell and to beat the wall and even to moan. Oh, it's wonderful to moan. How sad that we say that you are mature when you are stoic. You know, he left you. He's a rat. And it hurts. And you walk around saying, "I don't care." What do you mean you don't care? Lock yourself in a closet. Draw his picture on a wall. Pow, smack. You know, a wonderful thing happens to you. It goes away. Don't deny it, accept it. But don't hold on to it, for goodness sakes. You know, I know a man who objected to the fact that his daughter was marrying this young boy at the university and disowned her, said, "I never want to see her again." He wouldn't go to the wedding. He wouldn't see her. For 14 years he didn't see his daughter until he had a heart attack. And then she came to his bedside with her husband, and amazingly enough, he was a nice guy. And he had given up his daughter in the wonder of 14 magical years together because he would not forgive her for leading her own life. Remember that you're forgiving as much for yourself as you are for others, because without forgiveness you can't move forward. You're chained. Actually, the other person is punishing you because you can't be fully you. There's no acceptance of human behavior unless you are a forgiver. And when you free yourself from these chains of grudges, you become able to look for other alternatives. So let it go. But you know, Gore Vidal said that all truth has become platitude. And that's our major problem. And that's the truth. You know, all the wonderful truisms about life, about beauty, about joy, about morality have been said, and therefore we say, oh, that's a cliche. If we could only get back to those things, we'd find marvelous ways and alternatives for life. And so I'm going to remind you of some old platitudes that may sound a little bit different under these circumstances. And this, number one, even when you seem to be on the right track when it comes to relating, you'll get run over if you just sit there. It's what you learn in relating after you think you know it all that really matters. And many a self-made man stopped too damn soon. And keep your chin up. It helps you to keep your mouth shut. And never kick a man who's down. He may get up. And most people don't believe in anything, and they're determined to have you share their beliefs. And the only people who profit from running people down are elevator operators. You know, I have ceased defining a beautiful day
as a day where everything goes my way. Good grief, do you realize that's the way we respond? And we come home and say, this was a perfect day because everything went my way. You know, it's made a big difference in my life to begin to define a perfect day as a day in which, through some power of mine, I was able to make a day better for you. I want to leave you with my credo for relationships. And here it is. I choose to love people. To love people. Not to judge them. I want to experience them as they are, not as I would want them to be. I want to grow with them, allowing each new moment to tell its own story, rather than perceive it as a product of our past. I want us to search together for fresh alternatives to our incompleteness, to our negativity, to our deception, to our fear, and to our despair. I don't want us to spend our lives thinking about life and change and celebration. Rather, I want us to spend our life celebrating and living and changing. And I never want to forget what the wonderful author William Saroyan reminded me of many years ago. People is all everything is, all it has ever been, and all it can ever be. People. You and me, together in love. Thank you very much.
Funding for this program has been provided by this station and other public television stations.
Video cassettes for educational organizations are available through PBS Video, P.O. Box 8092, Washington, D.C. 20024.